Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, different parts of the world. Welcome to Interchange 23, the third annual Commonwealth Scholarship and Alumni Global Conference. And this year we are focusing on climate change. I hope you've enjoyed the first few days of Interchange. We had the opening session yesterday, and I look forward to welcoming you to today's panel discussion. Today's panel discussion is about clean air, and we will have a roundtable discussion that will bring together a panel of Commonwealth Scholarship alumni and scholars to lead the discussion. It will also be an opportunity to explore this broad theme in more details. Before we go into the introductions, if I could ask you to just going to check if I can ask you to complete a poll will pop up on your screen or on the side of the screen. We will just take, it's only 3 questions, and this will help us understand the objectives, if we're meeting the objectives and the objectives of these panel discussions better. So I will go on mute for 1.5 minutes and give you the opportunity to just complete the poll, please, if you could, and then we will make the introductions. This is the last question. We have 3 options. Give a few more seconds. Excellent. Thank you so much for everybody's input. This was really helpful. I don't know if we can probably at the end share some of the results from the poll. So as I mentioned earlier, this year, Interchange theme is clean energy, air, and oceans. Yesterday we had a session about clean energy. Today's session is about clean air, and today's session will be chaired by Jen Bardsley, who is our Global Head of Science at British Council. Welcome, Jane. I will also quickly mention the panelists who are joining us, and you will hear more from them about their experience and expertise in the field. Today's panelists are Professor Biswas Karabi Farhana from Department of Environmental Science and Management and Director, Office of Graduate Studies, North-South University from Bangladesh. Welcome, Professor Biswas. We also have Gio Okure, who is Air Quality Scientist and Program Manager, Makerere University, Department of Computer Science and AirQo Project from Uganda. We have with us as a panelist as well, Sangeetha, Piriya, Ramasamy, who is a Commonwealth split-site scholar at Cranfield University, UK. And I'm also checking, we also have another panelist who is joining us shortly, but we're just trying to resolve some technical issues, who is Vishal Singh. He's CEO and Director of Research, Center of Ecology Development and Research from India. I am going to hand over to Jen for taking the session forward, and I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As May said, I'm Jen Bardsley. I'm the Global Head of Science. I'm responsible for the science programs within the British Council. And I'm really excited to be here today and hear from the panel of experts. So my own background is in matrix biology. So that is vastly less relevant to clean air than all of our experts today. So without any further ado from me, I'd like to actually ask them to introduce themselves individually, give us a brief background and an idea of their particular areas of expertise. So I think basically in the order I can see you on my screen, if I could start with you, Professor Biswas, to introduce yourself and give us an idea of your area of research.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I guess there are participants from all over the world. My name is Biswas Farhana, and I thank British Council and Commonwealth Commission for inviting me to this very important roundtable discussion. I like to introduce myself as an atmospheric scientist who actually likes to work on to know the basic science of the atmosphere, the basic chemistry of the atmosphere, and the improvement for the air quality. With my background education in applied chemistry and chemical engineering from University of Dhaka, I actually started to be involved in research in atmospheric science since my postgraduate level at Dhaka University. Then I did Masters in Environmental Sciences from Australia, University of Newcastle, under Australian government scholarship. And then I did my PhD under Commonwealth scholarship from 2001 to 2004. My institution was University of East Anglia in Norwich, and I did my the research was on the halogen chemistry of the tropospheric level to understand the basic chemistry. And that research actually and the whole opportunity to enjoy the Commonwealth scholarship was eye-opening for me. For many reasons. One of the reasons was that my research project actually allowed me and actually brought me the opportunity to travel from 50° north to 50° south, from Britain to Antarctica and Antarctica to Britain, back and forth, 2 cruises I had to do to know the interhemispheric chemistry, interhemispheric transfer of tropospheric halogens. And after that, I moved to USA. I as a postdoctoral scientist at the Department of Health, New York State Department of Health. From 2006 to 2008, I was there as a research scientist, and then I moved to University of North Carolina as an assistant professor. Again, I did my atmospheric research. I used to teach there as well. Then back in 2010, I returned to my own country, joined North-South University, and now actually I'm working as a professor, and I'm also overseeing the graduate studies of the whole university as a director of the Office of Graduate Studies. My current research involves I'm always interested in the pollution in the mega cities. So my current research involves the pollution of Dhaka city, air pollution of Dhaka city from different perspectives. One of my current research actually in that I did ground-based measuring of the atmospheric pollutants at the very heart of the city, and then looking at the health effects of it, and so I'll try to also find the sources of these the pollutants and whether there is any transboundary effect or whether they are coming from the local sources. And another of my recent research was done during the COVID lockdown period. I tried to see why the COVID lockdown actually did not have much effect on the air pollution level of Bangladesh, especially in Dhaka city. So, and I have some other research projects in new sustainable textiles and also biodiversity conservation. I'm also working in the field of circular economy. I teach several courses, including climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Biswas. And Deo, if I could come to you next, introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Yes, my name is Deo Okure, and I'm an air quality scientist from Uganda. I believe on this panel, I'm not only representing the scientific voice, but also more uniquely, the African voice, the scientific context, like the context from the African continent. And I think speaking of Africa, we have a lot of potential in terms of the wealth in biodiversity, natural resources, and of course, great climate and amazing people as well. But each day we see that potential diminish because of the threats of climate change, and of course, like we shall see today as well, on air pollution. The global South and Africa is actually disproportionately affected by air pollution. And if I try to bring in some perspective, in the African setting, the socio-economic cost of air pollution actually supersedes other non-environmental challenges. And the main reason, and yet we of course still see that there is not much capacity. There is inherent lack of capacity at an institutional level to be able to design targeted intervention to tackle the challenge of air pollution. In part because the cost implication, it can cost up to maybe, you're talking about $500,000 to set up one monitoring station. That is just very prohibitive for many cities in Africa. But we have the unique opportunity to actually be able to co-design solutions, to co-design new approaches to tackle this problem of urban air pollution. And we work with a team that is doing exactly that, that is advocating for new approaches for air pollution. We are based in Makerere University, Kampala, and we're developing scalable solutions, scalable, affordable, and low-cost solutions that can be replicated in different parts of Africa, in African cities. We believe by developing solutions closer to the problem, we shall get closer to clean air for African cities, which is a fairly ambitious vision, but we think it's possible with the contributions that we make. My background is mechanical engineering and environmental science, and I did my scholarship period was in 2014, 2015 in Glasgow. Glad to be on this panel.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's so great to have you with us here today. Sangeetha, if I can come to you next.
Oh, hi. Good day, everyone. My name is Sangeetha Piriya, and I'm a visiting PhD student at Cranfield University in the United Kingdom, currently under the prestigious Commonwealth Split Site Scholarship for the year 2021. My area of expertise is environmental science with the special focus on agri-food. I hold senior research fellow at Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, India, which is funded by Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, where I'm working on the heavy metal management in the industrial effluent. My research interests fall under the umbrella of both wastewater treatment and the greenhouse gas emissions. I've been privileged to work under the guidance of Professor Ruben on the climate action project here, which specifically deals with the clean air. That's on the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. While studying at Cranfield University, I am particularly interested in exploring the climate change mitigation technologies, which are related to the greenhouse gas emissions. And owing to the availability of advanced research facilities here. And the strenuous efforts has always been an inspiring and motivation to me to learn more. And the project I'm working currently is on the quantification of trace emissions of carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide from the soil under the incorporation of silica into it. This is done using a Picaro gas concentration analyzer, which is known for its high precision and real-time measurement capabilities. It is widely used in both research and industry applications around the world. I believe this incredible opportunity will set up my career in finding solutions to the global issues. Apart from my research activities, I'm thrilled to be a Commonwealth scholar and to share my insights and knowledge on clean air. I am excited to be a panel member and interact with other allied members and the audience. So I'm really looking forward to discussing and exchanging the ideas with all of you. Thank you, British Council and Commonwealth Commission, for giving me an opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Vishal, if I could come to you, I'm really glad to see you've been able to join us. Would you be willing to introduce yourself, a brief background, and then we'll move on into the questions.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, finally I'm here after a little bit of navigation. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. And my name is Vishal Singh. I am currently heading a not-for-profit organization in India. We work between the academia, the policymakers, and the communities in order to bridge the gap between science and policymakers. I was awarded the the Commonwealth Professional Fellowship in the year 2015, and I had spent time at the political economy group in the Department of Geography at the University of Cambridge. And since then, I have been working basically on knowledge transfer, knowledge management, and basically democratizing knowledge for better uptake and awareness. My areas of expertise are forest, air, and water, basically working on forest hydrology and looking at urban water security and air pollution impacts, especially from the adaptation point of view. Most of my research has been concentrated in the Himalayas, and recently I am pursuing better partnerships and networking between organizations for recognition of the ecosystem services that the mountains provide for the rest of the vast population in the downstream basins. And I happen to be one of the members of a huge project in India that is going on. It's called the Namami Gange project. And I identify myself as a translational ecologist. I demystify research for people.
All right, I couldn't unmute there for a minute. That's great. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear from you all today. And certainly when I was asked to do this, I couldn't think of anything more relevant to all of us than the quality of our air. So I'm really excited to see where this discussion takes us. And if I could start with a question for you, Professor Biswas, what do you see as the interconnectedness between air quality and air pollution and the global issues that face climate action in general?
Thank you, Jen, for your question. So you asked me about the interconnectedness between the air pollution and the climate action in general. So if that's the question, then we need to really look at what are the differences and also the connection. So actually, it's really important to understand the interaction between air pollution and climate change, because in the context of climate change, which is actually a big buzzword at the moment, and everyone is talking about this, but the air pollution has been heavily ignored there, or heavily not really included as much, I have to say. So what is let's have a look where actually the differences stand and why these misinclusion or disinclusion of the air pollution happens. If, for example, if we take a few countries in the world which are actually big emitters of carbon or other greenhouse gases, in the context of climate change, there must be big contributor, but most of them have managed their air pollution very efficiently. So this is one of the difference we see, and or vice versa, the countries which are actually vulnerable from the climate change context or in the climate change context are mostly heavily polluted by air pollutants. A suitable example can be Bangladesh, which is actually a climate vulnerable country, but its major cities like Dhaka city or Chittagong are heavily air polluted. So here is the interesting difference we see among the climatically polluted countries and or climatically big emitters and the air polluted countries or regions of the world. But is there always this difference, or is there also interconnectedness? For this part, I like to have a look at the deadly air pollutants, for example. The deadly air pollutants are particulate matters, for example, the fine aerosols, particulate matter 2.5 micron diameter, or the ozone and acidic gases. These are deadly air pollutants. Among them, particulate matters can have also a role in the climate cooling and climate warming. Ozone is also a greenhouse gas. Let's have a look now in the climatic pollutants. The major climatic pollutants are, which are actually having the most important role in global warming currently, are carbon dioxide, methane, and black carbon. Interestingly enough, contrary to the public perception, they do not have any discernible health effect. So here's the very interesting difference that not all climatic pollutants are actually, not all air pollutants are climatically significant, or not all climatic pollutants are actually air pollutants. However, beyond this difference, there is a very interesting similarity. The similarity is that in most cases, the sources of the greenhouse gases, or major greenhouse gases, and the deadly air pollutants are very same. The sources are same, and for example, if I cite a research work done by Purdue University researchers, they show that more than 80% correlation is there between the particulate matter 2.5 and the greenhouse gas emission multipliers. So despite this important linkages, interestingly enough, we see that in the interventions to tackle climate change are very separately done and very much separated than those to tackle the air pollution. So, but it is actually it could be actually very different if we could integrate these two very cleverly, and if with that actually it could be very easy to show to the countries or actually countries to actually accept that there are actually immediate benefits in controlling the or taking the measures to control climate air pollution and also mitigate climate change, rather than the benefits which we are going to see in distant future. So this is the interconnectedness, and it's also important to say that this integration of air pollution issues in climate strategy is really important to have a win-win situation, because it is true that not all the strategies will be equally beneficial for air pollution control and climate change mitigation. But taking the or maintaining a right balance between air pollution and climate change, it is possible to lead to a very win-win situation, as actually, which is not really present currently. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. It's a supplement or a sort of an immediate follow-up to that. Sangeetha, I'm hoping I can come to you about to what you see as the most pressing issue related to clean energy, air, and oceans that we need to address to mitigate the effects of climate change.
Thank you, Jen. We know global climate change is not a future problem. So we also know IPCC has stated that human influence has been the major driver for the climate change that has observed since 1970s. And changes to the Earth's climate, which is driven by the increased human emissions to the atmosphere because of the heat trapping greenhouse gas emissions that have already had affected on the environment, such as melting of the glaciers and the heat waves, introduction of the heat waves, and plant and animal geographical ranges, which are actually shifting now. So all these problems are because of this. And when we see the sea level rise in 2030, it is estimated to be 30 to 60 centimeter rise, even though we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. Also, as per the United Nations report, in 2021, the global mean temperature was about 1.1 degrees Celsius, which is above the pre-industrial level. And if you see the last decade, that's from 2015 to 2021, that has been recorded as the warmest years in the ever. And if I talk about the clean energy, we can, based on all this context, we can say it has two major outfalls. That is, one, with the generation of clean energy. Is it the energy exactly clean? We mean, because if we talk about energy producing technology, which depends on the fossil fuel directly or indirectly for the production, transportation, installation, all the operational activities taking place, it makes not 100% clean or renewable, even if it is, even if we see the output as 100% clean. So in order to overcome this, all the hazards, green manufacturing comes into the picture, which reduces the overall carbon footprints of the technology throughout the process. And the other outfall will be what is the next stage of the technology, that is afterlife treatment. If we look on afterlife treatment, there's no, in current situation, there is no standard disposal policies or framework in the countries followed to dispose. If we see the energy waste generated, it is estimated that it will be around 75 million tons of the waste generated will be accumulated overall. So where will these waste go? So there should be policy norms where where it lacks actually. So this is what I feel in the clean energy sector. And if we talk about clean air, the major problem is due to the greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And that is because of the contribution by transportation emissions and the agriculture emissions and the construction emissions also. So if we see transportation emission, it accounts for 37% of the carbon dioxide emission into the atmosphere. And if we see an alternative to this transport emissions, we talk about electrical vehicles, which are now into role. If we say electrical vehicles as an alternative technology to this problem, we also have to find a solution. What happens when these vehicles get into fault, and what about the maintenance of these electrical vehicles? So that's where it lacks. And the other outfall would be the agriculture sector. It emits 18% of the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and it's like inevitable. So the major contributors are wetlands, like rice ecosystems, and the livestock. It produces around 500 metric tons of million tons of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So And for instance, if we talk about Indonesia, which has large amount of rainforests there, it is also a major contributor to the greenhouse gas emission. So we have to talk about the carbon sinks and the carbon capture methods, which can be best alternate to reduce the emissions in the atmosphere. And similarly, now if I talk about clean oceans, the problem would be the methods to treat or to mitigate or to remediate the microplastics in the ocean that causes marine pollution. So over research estimates says that 14 billion tons of microplastics is also dumped into the ocean, which is like very problematic, and definitely it will be a threat to environment and to the humans and to the sea life. So all these factors are to be addressed to see the effect of climate change on human environment as well as other direct or indirect the species.
That's great. Thank you. We're actually we're quite good for time on this question panel. So I wonder if I could actually open this up to you, Deo and Vishal, and get your takes on this question as well. And actually, Deo, I think maybe particularly for you, because you'd mentioned that you very much have a sense of yourself as representing the African voice on the panel too. I wanted to ask about accessibility, just to kick this off. I mean, clearly there are technological solutions or the possibility for technological solutions to start to address some of these challenges. And as Professor Biswas said, there's kind of a win-win to reducing emittance will clean up the air and eventually help us reduce overall carbon emissions. But what about the accessibility of that technology, the affordability and the availability of implementation? And how are we going to reach all the places where these problems are with technologies that may be prohibitively expensive, difficult to scale? It would be really interesting to get your take on that.
Yes, thank you. And I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Just to make sure. Yeah, I'm going to approach that on like two levels. Like firstly, broadly from the context of like our climate action. Professor Biswas has already laid out, I think, the scientific interconnectedness. I won't be able to repeat that. And then, of course, I'll also maybe talk about now the practicalities of how we can be able to effectively leverage technology to address the challenge of air pollution in the global cities. So first of all, I think the interesting point by Biswas about having the disparity. If you try to put side by side the Western countries versus all the heavy greenhouse gas emitters versus, say, the global South, finding that emitting more climate pollutants, and somehow they're able to manage their air quality. They have the infrastructure for that. It's the other way on the other side. So now, what does that mean when it comes to air pollution action? What I like to point out is that I think the other synergistic issue is that climate action, at least the foundational prerequisites for climate action, that would set the basis for integrating air quality climate action is actually articulating the Paris Agreement. In other words, we can be able to tackle both climate emissions, but at the same time, the air quality issues. And one of the key avenues would be in the NCDs. We know, of course, that because of the historical contributions, there's a heavier burden placed on the heavier emitters to be able to support, these countries, the lower emitters. So I believe that's one potential avenue where the NCDs are nationally determined contribution, which is a legally binding obligation for every country. We can be able to leverage that to be able to highlight actually air quality as one of the priority areas alongside climate action. So if we're talking about accessibility to resources or technology or even capacity enhancement avenues, we can read within the climate, country-specific climate pact, at least at the highest level, we can be able to highlight actually air quality as one of the priority areas within the context of climate action. Obviously, it might not touch on all the key pointers because there's some differences there that I think Biswas was able to explain, but I think fundamentally, it raised the profile of air quality as an important issue, as an important priority area. That's on the one hand. But then on the other hand, in terms of the practicalities of actually ensuring, first of all, developing the technology, but at the same time, and guaranteeing access. I think I did mention in my introduction that there is a need for new approaches, alternative approaches to tackling air pollution in limited resource settings. The reason, of course, is that traditionally it costs a lot of money to be able to go the conventional way, and maybe that's why even for the Western world, it's taken 40, 50 years to kind of be able to build a system, to build infrastructure, and build capacity to be able to do. But we have a unique opportunity, especially within the African context, obviously, to learn from established practices, but at the same time leverage the advances in technology. So now we have low-cost sensors, for example, that will cost a couple of hundreds. A reference monitor, I'm talking about like a standard monitoring equipment for air quality, it could cost you maybe about $30,000 for one pollutant. And you can actually be able to, like to demonstrate at AirQo, can be able to build our own monitoring devices that could cost less than $1,000. So you see the potential of being able to scale up, that intervention, the innovation to make it more accessible. But what's really important is that the issue of capacity, we need to be able to at least ensure we are able to build capacity around, first of all, developing the technologies locally, but also deploying them, appreciating the data, data access, data handling, awareness on all those different aspects of the moving pieces of intervention, of air pollution intervention. I want to pause there, but again, just to emphasize that I think all these aspects, when you talk about climate technology development and transfer, it's just one of the core pillars within the Paris Agreement. So I think there are many ways of being able to actually look at the two side by side, while identifying the different, the lower hanging fruits or the possible avenues to advance air quality, air pollution action. I'll pause there.
That's great. Thank you. And Vishal, I'm hoping you can come to you on this question as well, but I think contextually, I'd be really interested to hear your opinion in particular. You mentioned what you saw as translational ecology, about communicating the science and the necessity for change to the wider, I think sometimes you say in science communication, the wider public, that I know you're aware of. There's a lot of different kinds of publics. There's the general public, there's also policymakers, legislators, investors, and the people that are actually going to have to change their behaviors on a lot of different levels. It's not just something any one person can do domestically. So what kind of strategies can we use to really start to bring people on board with not just the necessity of change, but probably the scale of change that's going to be needed, the investment that's going to be needed, and that this is going to be something that is kind of forever and lifelong. We will always have to have a permanent shift in the way we behave to really start to address these challenges. Are you able to unmute?
Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah. I really like your question in terms of, how do we implement these kind of strategies? So one of the biggest barriers here, not only in terms of air pollution, but other areas as well, there are approaches have been very departmental and, subject area specific. So what is happening is that the noble knowledge that has been created by the scientists does not really reach the policymakers or the people sitting at a level where we need to actually take the knowledge to. And but we are not trying enough in terms of how we could make this knowledge useful and usable for the policymakers. That is creating this huge barrier is creating the disconnect between science, the common public, as you rightly mentioned, out that there are different kinds of players into this entire gamut, and the knowledge is often displayed in a very complex forms. So it is very difficult for a policymaker to go down and extract a paper from some PDF graveyard and make it into a policy. So that needs to be a process that we need to bring people who could translate this knowledge and effectively communicate it to the bureaucracy, the political leadership of the country, and even at international forums. As far as air pollution is concerned, the areas that I've worked in, there is an enormous dearth of knowledge and awareness about air pollution. It is not recognized, in comparison to what we see in terms of water or in terms of other areas that touch human life. Air pollution is still, it's still relatively nascent as far as the understanding is concerned. Right across the Himalayan belt, if I say from Afghanistan to Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, the entire belt, several cities, which are the major cities, as Dr. Biswas also mentioned about Dhaka, Chittagong. We did a study on four studies. The actual problem is that people do not relate air pollution directly to anything else. While we understand the interconnectedness is there, but it is limited to a certain very small group of individuals. So our understanding, and what we tried to do was to understand what is the understanding. So, and we saw that the entire belt, the understanding is very low, and it is related to other areas rather than air pollution directly. And this multi-layered, and hence it becomes very multi-layered and complex because it is not recognized as a problem at all. So in those terms, we may have the technology, which is expensive at one hand. Secondly, technology can only show the direction. The real change needs to come through social and behavioral change, and that is where we need to put our investment upon. Right. So as long as we do not have enabling policy, as long as we can't just go and say that from tomorrow we are going to be green. The transitions need to be just. There are several people who depend upon whose profession is something that would incur a certain amount of air pollution, but they're very small. In a larger group, they make it big. But that transition needs to be just. It needs to be adaptable. It needs to reach down to the lowest, at the bottom of the pyramid, because they are the people who are suffering most from these issues. A cobbler who sits in the road is exposed to air pollution throughout the day. Or, for example, anybody who's working in construction agency is exposed to, but they do not have the capacity to adapt to these kind of problems. And those who are minting money out of this are largely seated in secure areas, indoors or other places, and have the wherewithal either to tackle this issue, or even if the investment is required in terms of health related issues. So this disconnect needs to be looked at, because while the awareness is not there, almost everybody who is exposed to air pollution is suffering some kind of a disorder, whether it is an eye disorder, whether it is a disorder related to breathing problems. So those indications are very much there. So, we need to sit down, deliberate, and talk about it in a more comprehensive manner and looking at the realities from bottom up rather than top down.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's really brought us nicely into the second question that I had for you. And Deo, I'm actually going to start off with you for this one. This is about current challenges in reaching our clean air goals. What you see are some of the key issues facing implementing realistic change and change that can be brought about with the resources we have available, the resources and the accessibility that we can make available. And how can we ensure that those changes are lasting and maintainable and sustainable in the long run? And I know you've touched on that a bit, but I'd just like to get a little bit more into the detail of that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, yeah, capacity is like a very safe and very broad framing. But maybe to dissect that a little bit more, I think just thinking of a hypothetical city X that's starting really from zero, okay, visibly heavily polluted, but then they don't exactly have where do you start from. So I think, and just to pick up from what Vishal talked about having that holistic approach, I think that's really key. And when I talked about the new approaches to air pollution, I think it's very much aware of the challenges we have with the current model. Tackling environmental challenges, not just air pollution, should not be left for governments. Rather, the people. We need to create an environment that allows that enables an environment that allows political demand for clean air, if I may. So how does that happen? So I'm going to segment that. So first of all, look at the stakeholder landscape more broadly. So we need to be able to create awareness. So lack of awareness really across the board, irrespective of whether it's a government or the stakeholder interest. There's generally the level of awareness is extremely very low. When people don't actually know what the problem is, then it's difficult for them to, if you're approaching it from a bottom-up kind of perspective, it's difficult for people to be able to hold decision makers accountable or to be able to demand action. Whereas on the other hand, just as an analogy, let's say government increases taxes on an essential commodity, people will easily take to the streets. But when you communicate and say, no, air pollution today maybe is 10 times higher than the health guidelines, nobody will care. But because they probably don't know, they probably don't know the extent of that. So being able to empower the public so that we're able to, first of all, create awareness, but at the same time, build civic competence. It allows them to be conscious. They can take action to protect themselves, take also maybe all their governments accountable as well. However, that can't be done in isolation. We need to be able to strengthen institutional capacity. That's really, really important, because at the end of the day, if you're taking air quality management to the taxpayer essentially government, because we're giving government resources to make decisions on our behalf. But we need to empower the institutions that take the decisions to be able to put in place appropriate policies that maybe enable new business opportunities, maybe create incentives that will then allow us to at least have infrastructure, have conversations that take us closer to cleaner air. So I think strengthening institutional capacity, which for now is lacking. So I'm still at the back of my mind, still talking about that city X that is starting from zero. So are people aware of it? Is their capacity? And then move a step closer, then move to the next level of actually investing in infrastructure for at least for evidence, for collecting evidence in the form of monitoring, because essentially if you really cannot quantify, there's not much you can do about it. Again, these would be the three key things I would look at. Again, no particular order, but just some of the existing challenges. So you find a country, let's say, a mega city like Lagos, which is maybe over around 60 million people or so. But you find, if you look at the monitoring infrastructure, perhaps you'll find, let's say, maybe one sensor for every 4, 5 million, 8 million people. that is nothing. But you want to be able to invest in infrastructure for monitoring. We have evidence that allows us to actually take targeted action, but also we're able to also hold ourselves accountable. So be able to monitor the outcome, be able to monitor the impact of the interventions that we're taking, so that at the end of the day, it's not, we have a systematic kind of approach to handling air pollution. And then lastly, just to say that, before it skips my mind, I think we need to have, at the end of the day, this is like an ongoing journey. It's not something that's one of, even after attaining the ideal levels of clean air, it has to be like a journey. So we need to be able to make an economic case for tackling air pollution. I did mention at the start that the cost of air pollution actually it's higher than other known challenges. So if we don't make the scientific case, the evidence allows us to make the scientific case for investment in air quality. Why should the government invest in air pollution and not tackle other challenges that are affecting the people, that are affecting livelihoods? So if we can make that case, to make it easier for us to sell action, to create the need for action, and to create the political demand for action on tackling air pollution.
That's great. Thank you. I actually have a supplement question to that one, which is over for you, Vishal, and it kind of goes back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier, and that is, how do we address this and ensure, ensure is a big word here, but work toward justice? Because I think you really pointed out the disparity between the people that, of course, are the most affected and the people that are best placed to make the change, and where people are maybe more able to influence change, or also possibly more protected from the more negative effects of air pollution in particular. So what do we do to need to work toward a just approach for this?
Right. So, as we've also already discussed, that the impacts of air pollution are disproportional. And we need to actually look at the SDG goal number 17. It is all about collaborations and partnerships. So having effective collaborations, not just within the academia or with policymakers, we need to bring people from the bottom to talk about their problems and discuss it. So any policy around air pollution needs to be very, very inclusive. So at this point of time, what we see is that inclusion is limited to cosmetic and, it's kind of, fulfilling a blank that, it is a checklist that we fulfill. But it is not. In the real sense, inclusion needs to be when people start participating into the policy dialogues and developing, which will enable co-responsibility, co-ownership of the whole issue, right? At the same time, when I say about co-responsibility, co-ownership, it has to be, balanced out in terms of, short, medium, and long-term goals. If we are planning to, cut down our emissions in next 5 years, then, it's something that is unrealistic. We need to have a short-term goal where we focus on adaptation through nature-based solutions, through indigenous methods, which are quite available with the community themselves, because the indoor air pollution existed for a long period of time and people have been adapting these things. Then we need to build up our infrastructure, upgrade our technology, and create, awareness amongst all stakeholders in tandem. And lastly, we need to set targets which are realistic, not saying that, in 5 years we are going to, we'll be net zero. This is impossible. And the way we are growing, the way other things are shaping up, it is not, air pollution is not a regional, national issue. What happens in Ukraine affects the entire world. What happens, what happens in Amazonia impacts our monsoonal patterns, and the forest fires in India impacts something that is in the Iceland. So these are this is not a local thing at all. While the direct impact would be local, but the bigger impact would be felt by the entire world. So we need to think in that direction. I'm not saying what I'm a promoter of deliberations, discussions, and even if we do not have evidence at the moment, we need to act. We can't wait for the next 5 years to build evidence that the glaciers are melting. The glaciers are melting. We all know that the glaciers are melting, and the reason behind is global climate change. So the action needs to start right with the communities, and rather than proving that my glacier melt, research says that it is melting 0.2 meters higher than yours. We all know about it. So let's use our knowledge. Let's use the existing information. We need to work on post-normal science and invest upon those areas for change right away.
That's great. Thank you. Professor Biswas, I wonder if I could come to you for a follow-up on that. You've had such an opportunity to see this issue from a lot of different parts of the world, and really working in a fascinating range of research institutions during your career. And I just wonder what your experience of that communication of the risk, of the need for change from the scientific side, because I know it's something that every scientist has to confront at some point, is how you communicate the results of those findings and the importance of it. But certainly in my own field, nothing was nearly as critical to human existence as atmospheric science would be for all of us moving forward. So what is your experience of communicating that? Have you found that policymakers are receptive to it? Is it very difficult to communicate? Is it the complexity? What do you see as the key challenges to moving the scientific understanding and the scientific consensus into really implementable change?
Thank you for your question. Yes, it is actually a challenge. I have to say in the beginning that the communicating the scientific findings, the outcomes to the policymakers, because in many parts of the countries, the scientists are not even part of the process. They are not even included in the process. So I have to say, this is the situation in my own country. Many of the policies regarding the climate change and air pollution actually happening. The strategies are being adopted, but the real scientists who have all the data, or who actually knows the bits and pieces and details of the causes and effects are not there. So this is a big problem. Of course, from the scientist side, there is actually a problem at the same time, because we, the scientists, are sometimes very much confined within the scientific community. We don't feel our responsibility to communicate the findings, the outcomes of our research for the wider audience. So so it's actually problem is there on either side. So so that's why actually science communication is becoming very important nowadays to communicate the wider audience and also policymakers. But at the same time, the government should have actually the good intention to be inclusive of the scientists who has the genuine findings with them. Sometimes the governments end up with the findings from those scientists who actually serve their vested interest. So I would have to pause here.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, science communication, and something that we all have probably a responsibility to address, but it can be very difficult to approach. But it's really good to get your take on that. And Sangeetha, I have a a slightly different question for you, if I may, about this. As a more early career researcher and working on your Commonwealth scholarship now, I'm kind of curious of what your opinion is about the diversity of voices that you hear in this field. Whether we have, because I think especially as Vishal was saying about the need to represent a lot of different kinds of communities and backgrounds, are we seeing a move toward a more diverse climate science, or are we still, especially here in the UK and as part of the split side activity, are you still seeing that there's a lack of representation for people maybe from global South universities or different countries and backgrounds, but also different economic settings, different routes into higher education and science as a career path? And I'd like to hear what your opinion of that is, and whether you start to see that changing.
Thank you for the question, Jen. I think this is one of the biggest challenges among different challenges, like mentioned by Dr. Vishal or Karabi ma'am or Dio. We, as a Commonwealth split site scholar, I have attended few of the workshops or conferences where I get to know the common ground problems faced by the by different regions. So the scholars who are working in a different sectors have their own opinions, and when I talk about the same, I would definitely have a different reflection compared to them. And as Karabi, she said that there's a lack of intervention, like introduction of the scientists communities into the policy framework or any global forum where we have to put forth our problems or our thoughts to develop a global solution, I would say. But this is where we lack, because I don't think that every community has an equal contribution to tackle the climate action or climate change programs. And when I talk about myself, I am working on the greenhouse gas emission, which is only limited to the laboratory part, which is not up to the global level. And there still need to be interventions done to take it them from the lab to the field level scale where it actually is applied. And there's not only a point of researcher to be involved in these actions. There should be other involvements from different researchers who are actually working on different fields, because this is not the alone field which is facing the problem. It is interconnected with other climate actions, like Professor Karabi mentioned in the earlier. And I feel as a Commonwealth scholar, this is definitely a good platform where thousands or lakhs of scholars come together and see what exactly happening in different states. And this could be an eye-opening platform to judge what is the most pressing issues right now and what is to be done right now and which is to be prioritized accordingly. And yeah, so there should be also an involvement of industries with the students and other stakeholders to decide on a global level. And yeah, I believe there is still efforts lacking in this part. And but as far as the actions and efforts are being taken nowadays, this will have an impact in the future that will definitely have a positive positive sign for us. And yeah, so that's how we can contribute. And I wish everyone is also contributing to the same field. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Wow, this is such an interesting range of experience and expertise here. This is, I'm finding this discussion really fascinating. Actually, my next question is back to you, Sangeetha, to start with. And this is about countries that they've signed up to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And it would be good to hear, in your experience, in your opinion, is that possible? And what are the challenges that we face in the road to that? And what would the impact be on clean air, better air for everyone?
Thank you, Jen, again. So as I was also, as I was mentioning before, this is one of the challenge, and and specifically, I would say education. That is very important and a biggest challenge in generating public awareness, specifically to the communities. I would say the marginal communities who are not aware of these things, and because people should be educated on the impacts of climate change. It's not about only impact, only awareing them with the impacts and knowledge. They should know how their everyday choices can help reduce the emissions into the atmosphere or into the environment to have a safer environment in the future. And other challenge would be investment, as Mr. Vishal already mentioned, that there's a need of a huge investment on this sector, and which is a biggest challenge right now, because and in this investment part, we also see governments, like specifically UK government, providing incentives to the students like us or from different areas, providing fundings to the research and development area, and also on the infrastructural facilities provided to the individuals. So all these are also helping in tackling the situations. And not only this, but there should be politically supported policy frameworks and regulations in the countries that should work with the same level of the investments and the education in a country, in the country level, or in the globe, at the global level. So not only this part, I would also say the technological advancement is also a challenge, where right now we are using green technology everywhere, or green manufacturing, or the green solids, liquids, whatever it is. So that is actually necessary to work on, because that's how a small level of reduction in climate, in the greenhouse gas emissions, can be observed. But there's also a thing called approaching renewables is not only the solution to tackle this situation, because we say renewables are wind energy or solar energy or whatever it is just a source of electricity. And we say electricity can run a mobile, but the parts of the mobile cannot be produced by the same renewables. So that's where the fossils or the fossil fuel comes in the play. And there's not a complete phasing out of fossil fuels in right now situation, but because for 200 years or more than that, or less than that, we're still facing the issue of dependency on the fossil fuel. I think that will still take a few more years to phase out completely, but then we can focus on some of the technological advancements, like carbon capture storage methods, or some other techniques where we can actually reduce the current level of emissions in the atmosphere. And we can also trap the carbon dioxide, which is from the source level, so that it should not emit into the atmosphere directly. Maybe we can convert it into some valuable products. And yeah, so there should be a loop of circular economy running, so that whatever waste is released into the atmosphere is not a waste, should be reutilized as a resource in some other aspect. And the level of output, I mean, the level of waste into the atmosphere, into the environment or the ecosystem, should be lesser than what it should release actually. And apart from all these things, I also believe there should be a social acceptance by the people. Even though policies and regulations are there, acting and are being framed, followed to some extent, but the public acceptance is must, because only I believe when there is a public involvement and there's a public intervention, there is much support and strengthened policy frameworks can be done. As a researcher, not only as a researcher, but also other stakeholders, like could be a farming community. One of the person in the farming community could be an organizational member. There should be public-private partnerships. So, and all these and all other places, which is highly challenging. And for all these things, investment is must. And that's again a big challenge for us. When I say all these challenges are important to work on, if these challenges could be met by some adequate measures to a substantial level at the country level, I think we can definitely make air clean. And so ultimately the transitioning from fossil to renewables, and by reducing the emissions by one or other ways, or by investing on the renewable energy technology advancement infrastructures, all these things can actually create a clean air atmosphere to the people, not only to the people who are at a higher level or a approachable level, but also to the marginalized communities who does not actually have an access to these. So yeah, I believe this is to be worked out, and it's still going on. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Professor Biswas, if I can come back to you, our final formal question is whether, following from the most recent COP26 and COP27 talks, some progress has been made, but there's clearly a long way to go and a lot of key issues to be worked on and worked out, especially in this global arrangement. So what do you see as the priorities that we need to address now to achieve our clean air goals? And I'd actually ask you that question too, about whether or not you think the 2020 or 2050 target for net zero is realistic or achievable.
Thank you for your question. Okay, maybe let's start with the COP26 and COP27, the outcome. COP26 actually took place with a lot of enthusiasm, because I mean, it was actually a 2 years gap after that. And it also ended with Glasgow Accord, Climate Accord. And there are a few pledges to curb the coal-based power, to cut the methane emission, and also to reduce deforestation by the end of the century. So, I mean, grossly, these three were really important pledges that we heard from not only from the governments, also from different NGOs, the companies, financial institutions. So they came with these pledges. COP27, in the contrary, actually expected with a lot of hope. We wanted to see some follow-ups of the net zero the target, how to implement that, but we didn't hear anything about that in COP27. It spent most of the time to talk on the loss and damage, how to actually, I mean, of course, they ended with a commitment to for loss and damage, and paying for loss and damage, and the payment will come from the richer countries, the annexed Tier 1 countries, to the vulnerable countries, for sure. But we didn't come to know much about the modality. Now, about the COP26, the commitments, they are sounded quite actually, I mean, it was promising, because actually the commitments towards the climate change mitigation have also some air pollution control co-benefits. I'll come to that. I actually mentioned in the very first part of this discussion that actually the integration of air pollution, that side is still really weak. Still, we don't see much integration, but there are some core benefits of air pollution control from climate change mitigation, and vice versa. So it is really now important to see the real integration of the air pollution aspects into the climate change mitigation policy, because we can see globally every year at least one big and few other climate conferences are going on, but they are not taking these air pollution issues very seriously. Although, as I said, that for many of the climatic pollutants and air pollutants, there are actually common source. So, if, for example, if we now this integration, I mean integrated policy is not that easy. There has to be a balance between the long-term and short-term goals of climate change mitigation and also air pollution control. If not, then sometimes, if, for example, it's a short to mid-term goals that integrated for air pollution control and climate change mitigation, it may actually end up in more warming. For example, an example can be here, like fossil fuel, phasing out the use of fossil fuel is actually a very important step for carbon emission control, methane emission control. At the same time, actually, when this burning of the fossil fuel will be reduced, there will be also less sulfur dioxide emission and also less sulfate particles. The sulfate particles actually reflect light and heat, and they actually have very important role in climate cooling. So if the fossil fuel are phased out drastically, then actually there will be lack of sulfate particles and the climate. So there might be a chance of more climate warming. Similarly, the issues are there with biofuels, and biofuels have, of course, a very good impact in the climate change mitigation, but not so much for the air pollution control. So there should be a balance between the short and long-term goals, and of course the real scientific aspects have to be understood. For example, phasing out the coal-based power and bringing the renewables instead have actually both benefit for, I mean, will actually make betterment of both climate change condition and air pollution condition. So we need to find this kind of, win-win situation. And so then this is about the COP26 and 27, and all the COPs actually come in with a lot of hopelessness. So I mean, we really like to see an end to it, because, for example, this time we did not see much follow-up about net zero. Your question was whether the net zero is really achievable by 2050. I would say no, if we have this business as usual. If this business as usual goes on, then I don't see any sign, as also Vishal, I think Vishal or Dio also mentioned about that. It is not achievable. For example, China says that they can be carbon neutral only by 2060. India says they can try to minimize the coal-based power plants and stop the becoming carbon neutral by 2070, for example. So if these two big population of the world cannot achieve it by 2050, or earlier, how can we actually expect that net zero can be achieved by 2050? Also, the actually pledges, there are a lot of pledges from, as I said, from the companies and the governments, and also from the NGOs, industries. But whether these commitments are really being translated into action, whether they are really being implemented, who is going to measure that? Where is the measuring tool to analyze and measure and monitor that these are being really actualized, the commitments are being actualized? We don't see that kind of tools yet. So that's one of the concern. Also in this COP26, for example, even also it's also true for COP27, we see participation of some innovative technology producers or manufacturers, and on and off, actually we see they appear in different countries and different summits with some innovative ideas, like personal air purifier, for example. personal air purifier or just smart gadgets which will blow filtered pure air to your nostril, and you have to be able to afford it. How about that cobbler, as Vishal said? How about the rickshaw pullers? How about that vendors who are on the street? They are the majority. So how can we actually ensure the social equitability of the air pollution, distribution of air pollution? So these are really important. So we should not actually nurture or encourage this kind of innovative technology manufacturers into this kind of, air pollution summits or air pollution, climate summits, actually, because this is going to make a huge maldistribution of air pollution, and climate justice is already not addressed. Air pollution justice is environmental justice is already not addressed. This kind of so-called innovative technology, like having running air purifier whole night, or maybe indoors, or the using gadgets, or maybe the clean air bars where you actually spend several hours and having relax and inhaling clean air. This kind of I have to say stupid ideas should not be encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was, I think it's interesting to remember to put COP26 in that context of during or just after the pandemic restrictions were lifted. And actually, one of the things that I was quite struck by during the pandemic was when everybody stopped traveling for a while, how wonderfully clean our air got, actually quite quickly in a lot of places where you weren't necessarily expecting. And I remember hoping, probably like a lot of people hoped, that that would have been incentive enough to see how rapidly we could turn it around. But of course, as soon as the ability to travel came back, our industry started to come back, and we realized exactly how economically dependent we are on the status quo. And actually, this is kind of getting us to the end of our initial panel questions, but Vishal and Deo, I'd like to give you a chance for a few last words each. And I think for both of you, it's that question of who pays for it. Vishal, I'd like to ask you about the idea of what within that context is clearly going to need to be industry shifts. So livelihoods are going to have to change. Investments are going to have to be made. People that are dependent on this to make a living are no longer going to be able to make a living that way. So where does that funding come from? We heard Sangeetha mention public-private partnerships, but I imagine it's a lot more complex than just that answer. So it'd be good to get a sense, especially from that climate justice lens, where does that investment come from?
Right. So, there's no clear answer to this in terms of, where this investment would come from. But, if I have to talk in terms of a growing economy like India, there's a lot of funds that can come from bigger industries that are operating within the India towards people who have not historically contributed to GHG emissions and are not presently contributing to GHG emissions. Their footprint is very, very low. But at the same time, if you look at communities in the Himalayan region, are suffering the most, or for example, those living closer to the tropics, the African nations, let's say the global south. One, the mechanism needs to be within the country for providing necessary payments for in terms of infrastructure, in terms of other needs to the vulnerable population who have not historically committed. But also, I think from the national perspective, it needs to come from the global north to different countries in terms of to adapt to these changes, because no country, whether it is India, China, Bangladesh, whosoever, can invest that much amount to tackle this kind of a problem. So there needs to be internal mechanism. There needs to be, it has to be a mixed mechanism where we talk of behavioral change, where you're not paying something. When we talk of improving adaptation possibilities for poor, where some investment is made within the country or from the outside the country. And then we talk of the larger, we talk of the biosphere as a one unit where, the developed nations pay for some of these things, because ultimately we are all going to suffer. And, we need to be either prepared to, act separately or drown together. So there needs to be a balance, and that balance needs to be worked out, whether through co-ops, whether through, other mechanisms. We need to strongly say these things. And in letter and spirit. Just tokenistic measures or declaring policies, doing, we've seen all this. I've been carefully looking at COP mechanisms, but I don't think anything has reached down to the people, the real people, right? So, these are certain things, and there are arguments by everybody which they can defend.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, that was the question I had for you, Dale, was that loss and damage question. Clearly, we know, as Vishal has also just eloquently pointed out, that the people that are suffering the worst effects of this are not the people responsible for most of the issues in the first place. They are the most vulnerable people. They're in the most vulnerable settings. So what do we do to try to, or is there anything we can do to try to make that a fairer system? And what are the greatest barriers, other than just lack of political will, to making that happen? Because I imagine there are barriers outside sheer politics, but I imagine that's one of the most significant ones.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to...
It's really hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, cool. Let me just try to speak
Perfect.
up.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. I think where I like to start normally on the question of financing is that I think it is important that first of all, we normalize tackling air pollution, including investment in air pollution, because in many instances, when we're discussing financing, it's kind of packaged as if it's something special that we need to sort of needs some more money to fall from somewhere. But I guess because the problem is that we don't see air pollution, we just suffer maybe the long-term consequences of air pollution. But when it comes to water, when it comes to tackling other challenges, talk of it, water, or then, you have pandemics, malaria, you have named them. Some more, where does that money come from? Okay, so why don't we normalize air quality, air pollution, investment in air pollution, just like we've handled every other environmental challenge? So that's the first important point that I always like to emphasize, that if we try to do that, then we can always move the action closer to, what Vishal is talking about, the people, the real people. Because if people know, first of all, they're empowered to take action, looking at that bottom-up approach. If we are, if we are talking about raising awareness for action, for just a very simple, basic example, right? Cooking, you've mapped out the signs that maybe cooking, burning solid fuel is a problem. How can you empower somebody to be able to, how do that rest up? Because at the end of the day, their choice is limited. It's either they cook with solid fuels or they go hungry. Obviously, going hungry is not an option, but can we tell them, are we able to, for example, say, look, maybe when you cook, this data says that certain hours of the day, because of environmental weather conditions, maybe air pollution is higher. Could you maybe cook during certain hours? Could you maybe open your windows, kitchen, maybe cook outdoors? So in other words, you're trying to normalize the conversation and not treating air pollution as something like, from like a different planet, but knowing that it's something we actually cause, the impacts are localized. That's one. Then in terms of the broader scope of, looking at the big picture aspects of investments, obviously I know COP, there was COP27, there was talk about loss and damage. Some people could argue that maybe is loss and damage now a ticket for polluting more because we can always compensate for it. That's for another day. But again, just look at within our lens of like air pollution. I think we need that conversation to keep happening, especially where at least we can be able to have that, knowing that this first of all is not going to go away anytime soon, both climate and of course air pollution as well. So we need to have all these platforms where we're able to have actually honest conversations. So if our leaders are very much invested, very interested in tackling environmental challenges or maybe even other pandemics, just like the way you see a lot of enthusiasm during climate negotiations, okay? Almost every global leader will show up for climate negotiation. So if we can somehow find a way of, carrying that energy, how the way we tackle COVID with urgency, somehow the money should have somehow the science delivered. So why not kind of like the same level of importance attached to tackling things that actually we deal with every other day? Every other day, air pollution is like a permanent pandemic. Because every other day we are facing air pollution. And yet we are here discussing, okay, where does that money come from? To make it seem like it's sort of like somewhere. Yeah. So I think without being very specific, I think I would approach it from those two like angles, being able to having this continuous dialogue around the possibly different avenues of financing, but at the same time, normalizing how we tackle the issues, the challenges that we face every day, just like we've handled every issue that face society. You can actually apply the same concept, and that's always the approach I do when I'm, talking to policymakers, talking to every day people, looking at how we can be able to. We actually empowered ourselves to address the problem. Let me pause there, and I hope I've been able to. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. And I really want to say thanks to all of you. That's been incredibly illuminating, and I really appreciated all your inputs into this. And we have quite a few questions that have popped up in the chat, so I'd like to direct this to those. The earliest one that I can find in here is possibly one we've already answered. It's to you, Professor Biswas, and it's about whether there's hope that we can overcome the situation in the near future. So I know you've made the point that 2050 is unrealistic, but actually maybe just in 10 words or less for each of you, do we have hope that the situation can be overcome in the future? Who wants to go first?
Well, we should try to be hopeful. So I'm not sure about the time limit, but it is actually the the targets are ambitious, but it's not impossible. Only the honest willingness that is required. But do we have this willingness? That's the question. Thank you.
Anybody else want to come in on the hope and will questions? A bit sunnier than the last couple of questions.
Can I?
Yeah.
It's good. And well, hope is a very strong word. And, it has been able to keep societies going for a long, long period of time. So our faith on hope should not disappear at all. There are a lot of individuals who are, right from the time when the climate crisis started to now, our community is expanding. And we hope that it continues in this manner, whether it is 5 years later or 5 years earlier. The human capacity the capacity of human brain is incredible. And if we continue to invest upon, right measures, we take inclusive action, we try to address this problem as a problem that concerns all, not just one nation or a particular set of society, then of course, we might achieve this earlier than we have committed. And hope we should, really cling upon our faith towards hope, our scientists, our people, our global leaders, in a positive manner, and continue to act together for this. So I would leave it at that point in terms of hope.
Thank you. Yes, I can always say that humans are relentlessly adaptable, but it's also what got us into this mess. So hopefully it'll get us out again. Deo and Sangeetha, is there anything you'd like to come in and say on the hope for the future question? There are more questions, if not.
Yeah, it's okay. Just to say that certainly experience has taught us that it can take several years to achieve clean air, but it's got to start somewhere. What gives me hope is that I think we are not where we were, or where, say, London was in the 1950s, in the smog, or in the the cold days in the USA. So whereas maybe it was still a journey of 50 years or so for other global cities, we have an opportunity to be able to learn from that, but also we have emerging, at least in the African context, we are emerging cities, so we can be able to build better, plan better, then hopefully that could give us take us towards a desired goal within a shorter time compared to maybe what's other global. So that's for me, yeah, that's what keeps me going, I would say. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Had to happen eventually, right? I mean, we should be better at this by now. Sangeetha, I'm just going to give you a chance to respond to that one too, and then we'll move on to some of the other questions in the chat.
I am also hopeful for my research work to be an effort from my part, and hope to do something good from my position. Yeah, I would end up with this.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think a couple of you touched on a reflection we've had in the chat about how people sometimes forget that the environment is borderless. So like you said, there's always that butterfly effect of what we do in one place, but also air doesn't stick to borders. It floats around and changes places and moves about. So we have to work together. The next question I've got is it possible to achieve clean air in small communities where there maybe aren't industry activities? Where I would guess maybe you have different air pollution issues, such as, like you said, fuel burning domestically or cooking stoves, things like that. But is it possible to achieve clean air in those settings?
May I take this question?
Of course.
Yeah. It's a very specific question, and thank you for the question. And I would say yes, especially if there is no transboundary effect. But it's a small community. If the local sources of air pollution are minimized, or not present, the air should be fairly clean, like transport emission or the industrial emission. But once again, depends on what is the location of the that community, or the small village or small city where it is. What are the regional cities and places are doing, or whether they have any country border with a country, or any region which have any nasty industry polluting, emitting a lot of pollution. Depends on the wind direction, and also, as I said, the transboundary effect is really important. So yeah, but at least they can cut down the local emission. Through not having polluting sources of air pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is, can the energy transition really lead us to clean energy and clean air in terms of technical and environmental aspects? And what is the hope for the developing countries in that transition? Anybody want to take that one on?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to take that one.
Okay.
So from the developing country perspective and the clean energy mechanism, see, most of our, our population is actually very, very clean in terms of polluting the air, right? So the people who are, or including you and I, who are from the developing countries, are polluters in some way or the other, but there is a vast amount of population which the contribution is very, very low. So even if we individually cut down our emissions, we can reach towards a clean air, agenda and start showing results within the next 2-3 years. There needs to be some policy, enabling policies to do that. There needs to be something that, there needs to be regulations, and these regulations and they need to be based on the kind of activity that you are involved into. So it would be unjust to put a tax upon somebody who has very limited footprint, someone who cannot avoid some amount of air pollution in this world. But there are big emitters where the tax needs to be differential, the tax needs to be just and not draconian. If the tax is going to be equal for everybody, then again, the poor and vulnerable are going to suffer, and this is only going to increase the problem and not solve it. So these are few things that a country like India or China, Brazil, Bangladesh can do to impose differential tax mechanisms or incentivizing mechanisms for not polluting. So it's not just taxing, but also rewarding people who do not pollute.
Great. And I think you'd actually offered to take the next one in the chat already. And this is the one about urban informal settlements. They're asking most developing countries the question of urban informal settlements, which are largely overcrowded and historically taken as unplanned and sometimes illegal, will need a lot of attention as a way forward in the effort to address the problem of air quality. Do we have any models in addressing this problem within this context?
Well, of course, just to give you a little glimpse of what happens typically in the South Asian context is, when we start developing or our urban centers start expanding, we need a certain amount of population to cater to the requirements of that, urbanization, which means that a lot of migrants start coming into the city for the services that we need, for construction works, for vegetable vendors, rickshaws, and other things. But most of them are never recognized as part of the society. The only option for them is that they occupy some settlements which are, again, very, very vulnerable. Either they are closer to the riverside, or they live in areas which has 24-hour of air pollution, closer to the roads or shacks. So they have never been recognized within the system. And something the human apathy towards the poorer class was seen when the pandemic was going on, right? Thousands and thousands of people had to leave the metros and go back to their villages, and they were not treated the way they need to be. The most important concern that I have faced is that such people do not have medical insurance, right? So if certain thing happens due to air pollution, due to water pollution or anything, the government refuses to take them because they are not recognized. So they're not of the cities or the villages. So this was perhaps the most insensitive thing that we saw during the COVID, and this needs to be recognized immediately. That the class of people who generally serves the entire urban settlement, which are much better than the others, do not get recognized. And we see it right from Pakistan to Bangladesh and everything that comes in between. And this is only going to increase because urbanization by these parts of the world, by 2050, more than 50 to 60% people would be living in urban areas. So, and the only places to attract these people where there's economy are concentrated to places like Dhaka, Delhi, Kathmandu, and so on, and which do not have the natural resources or the capacity to cater this kind of population. Hence, they would continue to be neglected. So the model is to register them. The model is to provide facilities to them. Again, the same debate comes back in who pays for it.
Yeah, and the logistics alone will be quite challenging. It'll say we have to be, and I agree with you, we have to start as fast as possible, but also be realistic about the length of time and the amount of effort that's going to take. That's going to be a big challenge. Thanks so much. So the next one that I've been asked is about carbon tax. So with the carbon tax policy being imposed on countries to curb carbon emissions, what other policy would be effective to ensure clean air, since most countries prefer to pay the carbon tax to ensure their security of supply? Yeah, I might actually ask you to weigh in on this one first, if you wouldn't mind.
Could you ask that again?
With the carbon tax policy being imposed on countries to curb emissions, what other policies would be effective to ensure clean air, since most countries prefer to pay the carbon tax to ensure their security of supplies? Is there anything else we could do that would be that kind of policy incentive on I guess really on a government scale rather than a domestic or regional and more local scale?
Yeah, I think that's a complex.
Sorry, it's a bit hard to hear you again.
Is it any
There we
better
go.
now?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm just move close to the microphone. Yeah, I think that's the complexity of trying to reconfigure some of the possible intervention. There's always going to be people trying to find like workarounds, or how can you utilize the existing incentives to actually be able to work around avoiding the responsibilities. But I do think that at least what I like about the climate action framework, again, is one thing to, of course, have commitment. It's another thing to actually act on the commitments. But again, let's assume, all factors constant, people actually rightfully want to act. I think the thing is that we actually we probably not invoking that enough. The climate framework that allows us at least to, or at country level, having NDCs, but also globally knowing that we have a 5-year burden on the other on the developed, on the heavier emitters. So I think rather than thinking about alternative policies, I think we actually do have many countries. If you go try to do an appraisal of like the policy framework, the policy ecosystem, you actually realize that actually many countries, we don't need new policies. We need to act with what we actually currently have. So we need to make the existing policies work. If let's say maybe countries prefer to actually pay the taxes, but how can you actually make that actually work? How can actually make it work for us? I think the biggest part is not policy, because we can legislate and even get that, but then we need to make sure that the existing frameworks are actually working for us. And I don't think, if we're being honest, to take like a self-reflection or a self-audit of whether what we have in place already working, you'd probably say no. I mean, we went to the Kyoto Protocol, failed, not because the protocol was bad, but maybe because at implementation, how actually countries are not, living up to their commitment. I believe the USA was a part of the Kyoto Protocol, for example. So I think it's sort of, avoiding this syndrome of just, okay, let's get policies in place, but rather can actually ensure that the existing frameworks are actually working for the people. Yeah.
That's great. Oh, and Vishal thinks there's a comment in the chat that conservation is less expensive than restoration. That's absolutely true. And the carbon tax, the carbon reward would need to be higher than the tax to make it economically viable to really provide that incentive. That's a really good point. That's actually the end of the questions that I can see easily in the chat. Mace, I was going to bring you back in to see if there's anywhere else I should be looking. Or if we're actually pretty much drawing to a close here. This has been a really brilliant session. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think that's the end of the questions, but I want to remind everyone that the lobby area is open all the time. You can also share your contact details by, I think there's clicking a button next to names where you can share it. You can share it with the speakers as well. Please use this opportunity to connect, because anybody who has added their contact details on Zoom events has agreed to share their details. And you can also continue the discussion in the lobby area. Thank you so much for the panelists. This was such an interesting conversation. It's recorded. We will post it on digital channels, and we will send an email out with the links. And thank you so much, Jen. Handing over to Jen for the last few words. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just to say thank you all again. That's been a really marvelous and very informative and really wide-ranging discussion. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone's really benefited from it. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I think we'll go ahead and close there, but a really brilliant session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any few words, anything else from the panelists? I appreciate everyone's time. I want to just remind everyone that tomorrow there are two very interesting workshops that we have planned as part of Interchange. The morning workshop, which is 10 to 12 UK time, is a career skills workshop. It's an interactive career skills workshop. And the one in the afternoon from 1 till 2:15 UK time is a presentation skills workshop, which is going to be also very helpful in how to present your work. On Friday is the last day, and it will be the last panel discussion, which will be about clean oceans at 10 a.m., followed by the closing ceremony. And I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Again, thank you so much to our chair and our panelists, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.